you also have quite a lot of content, or at least you did at the time that you recommended to me, that focused on the various gender issues, whether it's feminism or men's issues or whatever. And not all the channels that get into the political stuff that you do ever focus on those things. Tucker Carlson touches on it probably more than anybody, but some of the channels, like someone like a big, person like Ben Shapiro, never touches on any of those issues at all. Matt Walsh does a little bit on certain issues, but not on others. Where did you form your growing up? You said in a liberal family in Australia, and I know what gender politics are like in Australia. Where did you form your ideas of gender roles and feminism in your environment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I guess it depends what we're talking about, because my channel focuses on a lot of different issues, and the whole point of the channel is that, like, there's not one thing that I like to focus on. I could focus on culture and politics and geopolitics and red pill stuff and like you said, feminist. So are you talking more about like the feminism side of things, or the gender discussion that's happening, or the red pill masculinity?
I would say feminism, more like anti-feminism, and the red pill, sort of men waking up to the reality. Those things, a lot of the channels that focus on similar political things that you do don't touch those. So that's like the third rail. They don't go there.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of the red pill stuff, I think that there's a lot of times that in every guy's life who actually has this experience, there'll be an experience that you have that actually red pills you, and that actually makes you ask questions of what's actually going on here, and everything that I've been told, is it true, or do I need to ask some more questions here? And I actually had a girl that I was seeing maybe nearly 2 years ago now, and I wasn't by any means like a massive simp or anything. And for those of you the young people who watch this, they'll know what simp means. But I let this girl really like walked all over me a lot, and then I had to sort of look back and think, I was such a nice guy in that situation, and there were so many things that I did right if you play it by the book. Why am I getting taken advantage of like this? And why were these girls just losing interest in me because of that? So then I started to go down the red pill sort of pathway where you start to ask questions about gender roles, and you start to ask questions about female and male nature and dating, and that really opened my eyes to a lot of things, and things that I knew intrinsically that I hadn't quite allowed myself to exercise in the world about the way that dating works. And my older brother, for example, he was naturally like that, and he understands the game and how it all works. But I'm a little bit more. I was a little bit more susceptible to the Hollywood narrative, if you will. Mm-hmm. So that's what kind of opened my eyes in terms of the red pill. And then in terms of feminism, I think it's just common sense once you do a little bit of research into it, that feminism paints men as toxic, especially modern feminism. And they have this whole narrative of toxic masculinity. They have zero concept of what it means to be a man, zero concept of what it means to be a thriving man, and how we can help men. It's the worst place you could possibly go for advice for men. And then for women, it also makes them completely miserable, because it basically encourages them to be just a career woman who focuses on her career, and that family is a bad thing, and that being feminine is a bad thing. And that you could not have worse advice for a young woman: to just focus on your career and don't have a family, because having a family is bad for the planet. And don't be feminine, because if you act feminine, then you are oppressed, and rather you have to act like a man and do everything that a man does. I've never ever seen a case where a woman takes that advice and goes along that path and doesn't end up completely miserable.
It's interesting. I agree with everything you said, but I take it to a step farther. And it's, I'm old enough to have actually, been in school when feminism was really coming on to its own. But what people today, I think, don't focus on is that when the feminism that was launched in the 60s and started to really take hold in the 70s, the idea is that women could do anything men could do.
Hmm.
So if you were in 1970 and you imagine what the future would be like, and it sounds absurd today, but this is what people really believe. They believe that 50% of construction workers and 50% of offshore oil well workers and 50% of car mechanics were going to be women.
Yeah.
And then what also came with that is that men could stay at home and cook and take care of the kids and et cetera, et cetera. So that you'd
Yeah.
see basically a world where there'd be no role different. Now, I grew up in a liberal family exactly like you did. We just continents away, but my family environment was quite liberal. But I had a lot of common sense even as a kid, and I watched my mom, who was and my mom was not like the progressive liberals of today, like the woke kind. She was like the bleeding heart kind. She's the kind of person that would do anything for anybody, was really a good person. I think was a little bit misguided as to how you get to helping people. I would disagree with her on that, but she really had good intentions. But I watched her in her own life and what she couldn't, all the things she could not do, no matter how much she wanted to do. And I thought, she's very smart. She's got a master's degree, and I don't believe she can't do them because of her. I think there's just things that in general, there's always exceptions, but in general, there's things that each sex generally does better than the other one. But then after I started my business and years went by and I started an intern program, and I had hundreds and eventually thousands of employees and students come through. And I actually had the experience, and 60%, maybe 65% of all my students were female, not male. So I had an incredible amount of exposure, and more because maybe a college professor watching this will say, "Oh, that's nothing." I have a much different experience because I'm not teaching them for an hour. I'm in an office with them 8 hours a day. In my home, I was housing 6, 7 of them. So I'm living with these people for 20 years. For 20 years, I lived with 19 to 25-year-old college girls. So I see them 24/7, and I really had a confirmation of what I thought already. And what I saw happening is that women never learned to do anything that men did. There was no more car mechanics. There was no more, they didn't want to do anything, construction work. But what happened is then neither did the men. So by the end, when I stopped the internship the year before COVID, what I had was, if I had 100 students in the year, I had 50 guys and 50 women. I had 50 women that couldn't work on a car or build anything or work a hand tool, and 50 guys that couldn't either. And none of them could cook, clean, or sew. So instead of each one learning the skills of the other, you had people that just could work on play on their phones and do social media and live at home till they're 35 years old and look for an office job where they could sit in the air conditioning when it was hot and sit in the heat. And no one, you could listen to Mike Rowe and you could put a lot of little pieces together, but I've never seen anyone put it together as a whole thing. You have and Jordan Peterson sort of hits on it, but doesn't connect the dots. There's just a crisis of competence in the Western world. People can't do anything anymore if they're under a certain age. I mean, when I was, kid, I wanted to do everything. I wanted to learn how to do everything. Even if I wasn't going to get a job or make a career out of it, I wanted to learn how everything works. I wanted to learn how to fix things. And now I got to the point where I had students driving $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 SUVs that parents bought for them that never worked a day in their lives, never cut a lawn or did any kind of job, and they get a flat tire. And I, as the owner of the company, I'm out there changing the tire for them because they can't even change a flat tire. They know absolutely nothing. To me, this is the result of feminism. It's not just that women didn't become equal. It's that it brought men down, and we have just a Western world of people that can work apps on their phone.
Yeah, I mean, well said. But I think what you're touching on there as well with the early revolution is that there's this notion at the moment that we've got that the 1960s, that was all positive and that was great and women's rights. And then there was the second wave and then the third, and then it's become a little bit toxic later on. When really, if you look at the early feminist writing, it was malignant from the start, and it was very rooted in Marxism. You've got the early feminist writers who are even Joseph, what's his name? Frederick Engels, sorry, Frederick Engels. He wrote about feminism, and in the sense that, and until women were liberated from the nuclear family, and until women were liberated from their roles, then they would never be free. They would always be oppressed. So the early feminist writing was very, very Marxist. You can read the quotes, and they basically say that the goal is the destruction of the nuclear family. The goal is the complete and utter destruction of the family. And then in that sense, yeah, it was always it was always rooted in Marxism, and nothing really good comes from that ideology. So
Yeah, and it goes way back, and I don't think you could ever have a really socialist state or communist state without that position of women. I don't see you can have a communist state that was Muslim. It's just because the cultures are too different. And once you bring women into that status that the West did, that's when, I mean, that's the problem we have in this country with spending. I mean, the social spending is, the military spending is out of control because of the corrupt politicians, but the social spending is out of control because of women. And if you look at the way women vote, especially unmarried women, it completely changed the whole social dynamic. There's a very famous quote that Winston Churchill did that he would have got canceled for today, where he basically was arguing, this is like way before World War II, where he's arguing against women getting the right to vote because he was afraid of this exact thing, that they would vote in so many entitlements that it would bankrupt the government. He said this like in the 20s or 30s. And I'm thinking, man, he was really had a crystal ball into the future. Because
I didn't actually know that there was that sort of, that women thought that it was going to be 50-50 in all roles. But if you look at what's actually happened, it's like you said, that hasn't happened, and they've gone into more sort of positions of bureaucracy and HR and all of these positions that, in many cases, they cause inflation in the workplace, and they cause inflation in the market. And they're not that, yeah, it's never going to be evened out, and the roles are always going to be very different. But now we're just going to have a lot more people in the workforce, I guess.
Yeah, it's a real well, it's like what the whole red pill is about.